Chapter 22. Devon and I slept late Sunday morning, at least late for us. We'd been out way past our usual bedtime at the wedding, and it was close to 2 before we'd made it back to the hotel. We picked Alexis and Caden up at the airport Sunday afternoon and took them back to the hotel to settle in. "Bill said you already had our room?" Alexis asked. "Yeah. He made all the arrangements, and we didn't discover until we got to the room that it was a huge suite. We'll stop at the front desk and get you keys, but we're not even using half the room," Devon said, easing his way through traffic on the way back to the hotel. "There's only one bed in the bedroom, but the sofa in the common area is huge, or we can have them bring up a roll-away bed." I tried to give them all the options. "Or we can split up, girls in one room, guys in the other." "We won't be doing that." Caden shook his head. "Why not?" I asked. "It'll keep anyone from having to sleep on the couch or the floor." "It's not safe." "What if someone were to come in the window after the two of you?" he asked. "But we're on the 19th floor, no one's going to come in the window," I argued. "Hopefully no one will, but we'll be safe rather than sorry," he insisted. "We'll figure out sleeping arrangements once we get there, and I have a chance to look things over." "I agree with Caden," Devon said. "I don't think it's a good idea to put either of you in a room by yourself." I saw Caden nod in the mirror. Devon continued. "I think there's a recliner in that bedroom, there is in ours. You might like that better than a roll-away." "We'll see," Caden said before changing the subject. "You've met the Anikitos, right?" "We did," I said. "We met with him briefly." "Give me your impressions of him," Alexis asked. I was quiet for several minutes, trying to find the right words. "I'm not looking for proper in politics, Nickie. I just need to know what I'm dealing with. I don't want to walk in there blind tomorrow," she clarified. I nodded, understanding. He struck me as polite, all business, not unfriendly, but not like Bill either. In all honesty, we spent less than 5 minutes with him, but he struck me as fair. He had a sense of humor, and he and Bill are good enough friends that Bill had me relay a message, one that pissed off his enforcer. "What was the message?" Caden wanted to know. I repeated the message for them, and Caden looked shocked as I continued. "The enforcer started for me, but Ridges stopped him. He said I was only relaying the message, not disrespecting him." Alexis looked thoughtful. She turned to Devon. "Do you have anything to add, Dev?" "No, Nickie about covered it," he said. "I am curious, though, who's going to this meeting tomorrow?" Alexis glanced around the car, meeting everyone's eyes, though Devon's were in the mirror, before answering, "Obviously, I have to go. I think Nickie needs to go as well." The simple answer would be that if both of us are going, then both of you go too, but I don't think that's a good idea. "Why not?" I asked, confused. She looked at me. "Because I don't think it's a good idea to have a meeting with the local Anikitos, who will have a single enforcer with 2 of our own. It could be taken as a challenge to his authority." She took a breath and explained further. "Even though we're not here to challenge him, if we show up with 2 enforcers, it may be seen as one, putting him on the defensive and making things more difficult than they need to be." I nodded, understanding what she was trying to say. "So which one goes?" I asked. "That's going to be up to them," she said, referring to Devon and Caden. "I can make recommendations and argue logical and political answers, but ultimately, they're the ones in charge of security and the decision is up to them." I nodded, thinking about it. "So basically what you're saying is that we need to go into this meeting as non-threateningly as possible in order to convince the local Anikitos to let us do something that, as far as he currently knows, is impossible. And we need to consider politics while we do it?" "That's right." Why do I get the feeling you're trying to teach me something here? Because I am, she said. I waited, knowing she would explain. You're probably going to be traveling quite a bit, meeting with different non-shifters, seeing if you can shift them and if they're willing to be shifted. You need to learn to do as much of this as possible, so that if things happen and someone decides not to shift, I don't need to make the trip. Another possibility is that I could teach another healer to do what I do and not have to travel at all. Okay, I get it, I said. So think about it a minute, she said. And tell me which of these two should meet the Anikitos with us, and why. I was quiet for a moment, considering several possible scenarios and situations before I spoke. Devon, I said finally. Devon should be the one to go in with us. Why? She asked. For several reasons. Number 1, he's already met the Anikitos and is somewhat familiar to him. It's not that we're hiding Caden. In fact, I would suggest he go to the office with us and just stay in the waiting area, but why rub his face in the fact that we have 2 of our enforcers here if we don't have to? Number 2, size. Devon is smaller, less intimidating in appearance. I'm not saying he's less capable, that's not what matters, appearances are. Caden's huge and that alone can be intimidating, which is great sometimes, just not in this situation. We want to be as non-threatening as possible. Number 3, living proof. Who better to prove that what we want to do can be done than someone it's been done to? I watched Alexis for any reaction. How did I do? Good. She nodded, smiling broadly. I think with just a little prompting and direction, you'll have little difficulty managing the sometimes prickly personalities of the various pack leaders you'll encounter. Devon pulled up in front of the hotel and let the rest of us out. Since Caden was with us, I could take Alexis up to the room and start getting settled while he parked the car and stopped for additional room keys. Upstairs in our suite, I showed Alexis and Caden around. The 2 bedrooms are pretty much the same, I said. With the exception of color, but if you'd rather have the other one, we can move. I offered. No. Don't move, Alexis insisted. This is fine. She set her bags down in the corner of the empty bedroom, while Caden set his down along another wall. Alexis looked around the room. Dev was right, there is a recliner in here, she said to Caden before stepping into the large bathroom attached. I'm gonna go wait for Devon. I excused myself and went out into the common room of the suite and sat down. I didn't pick up a magazine or turn on the screen, I just sat looking out the large wall of glass that offered a stunning view of the city in front of me. My mind was blank, I didn't think about anything but the beauty in front of me as I watched the sun set. The next morning, we climbed back into the car and made the trip across town to the offices where Devon and I had been just a few days earlier. We were quiet as we made our way to the right floor and waited for our meeting. When Veronica called us in, Caden held back, staying in the waiting room as we'd discussed. Alexis led our little group as we followed Veronica down the hallway to the Anikitos' office. She announced us simply. The Harmonia from Arizona, Alexis Jeffries. Veronica was already in the process of backing out of the room and pulling the door closed behind her. The Anikitos was again sitting behind his desk, with the same enforcer standing silently near the wall behind him, looking intimidating. Ms. Jeffries, the Anikitos stood and offered her his hand. I saw the appointment on the calendar, but I'm at a loss as to the reason behind your visit, he said politely. Well, Alexis said matter-of-factly, I'm here to explain that to you. It's going to take a few minutes of your time, and I ask that you be open-minded and let us finish before you make any judgments. The Anikitos looked intrigued. All right. He motioned us to a seating area on one side of the room. Why don't we have a seat while we talk about this? Alexis and I sat on the sofa, while Devon remained standing nearby, his feet slightly apart, one hand holding the wrist of his other arm. He looked at ease, but I knew he was ready to move, should something threaten Alexis or me. The Anikitos took a seat in one of the chairs that had been arranged, so they weren't quite facing the couch, but were still close enough for comfortable conversation. His enforcer took a position similar to Devon's, not far away. "What's this all about?" He folded one leg until the ankle rested on the opposite knee. "Are you aware, sir, that you have a non-shifter living in Seattle?" He shook his head. "No, there's really no reason I should be." He looked confused. "Well, until now there hasn't been, I'll agree. But we have the ability to possibly shift him, assuming he chooses to try it," Alexis said. The Anikito's brows lifted in surprise, but he remained silent. "While Nickie and Devon," she gestured to the two of us, "were here in town, our Anikitos arranged for them to meet the non-shifter. He's a tour boat operator, so it was fairly simple. He just scheduled them to take a tour. During the tour, Nickie determined that he may be able to be shifted. What we'd like now is your permission to make the offer to him. He's been in the area for a while and has an established business. If he chooses to shift, he'll likely stay in your territory." "All right," the Anikitos said. "I'm confused. Non-shifters don't shift. That's why they're called non-shifters." "That was true until now," Alexis said. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Have you heard Nickie's story? That she's only recently discovered she's a kitsune and about our world?" Alexis seemed to change the subject. "She said she only recently found out she's a shifter and she's still learning the culture. Was she a non-shifter?" He looked confused. "No," Alexis shook her head, "but she has a unique set of talents." "Oh." He seemed intrigued. "Nickie has the ability to call animal forms." Alexis started. "That's uncommon but not rare. We have 3 in our pack," the Anikitos said. "Counting Nickie, we have 2 and I'm the other, but that's not what makes her unique. It's that ability, in combination with her ability to sense power." "Sense power?" he asked. "I've never heard of that." "Apparently, it's pretty uncommon, or those who have it don't know what it is," Alexis explained. "Nickie figured it out, because my mate has the same ability and has figured out some of it. Until Nickie, he'd never encountered anyone else with the same talent." "So how does this make her able to shift a non-shifter?" "Because with her ability to sense power, she's able to feel their wolves before they've shifted." She took a breath and let it out, letting him process the information. "But that's only part of it. She can call the animal form because she can sense it, although the one we've done so far had something else, some kind of block keeping him from shifting. That's where I came in. I'm a healer. I was able to fix the block so that she could call the animal form." "So you've only ever done this once?" He looked back and forth between Alexis and me. I nodded and he continued. "How did the person shifted handle it?" "Quite well, actually. You see, Nickie won't even try if the non-shifter doesn't want to, and we don't allow them to be pressured into it." The Anikitos nodded. "The one you've shifted, how are they doing now?" "He's doing well. Much of his life is still the same. He has the same job, lives in the same place." "What about the pack? How did they take it?" "They've taken it pretty well. It probably helped that he'd grown up in the area, but being male, he could have just moved to the area. He's only been able to shift for a couple of months, and he's already managed to qualify as an enforcer." The Anikito's eyebrows shot up at this, clearly surprised. "They'll trust him that much?" "He does," Alexis said, plus the new shifter had another reason for qualifying. "What was that?" "He wasn't willing to let another male travel with his unsealed mate, and we have no female enforcers right now," Alexis said bluntly. "Why did she have to travel?" "To come check out your non-shifter." I met his eyes when I spoke, trying to gauge his reaction. You're the mate? He asked, his eyes leaping from me to Devon, who still stood behind us. You're the new shifter? Devon nodded. I am. Mr. Ridges looked at the two of us with a new appreciation. You said you're new to the culture. He said to me. How new? I shifted in early June. He turned to Devon. And you? Early to mid-July, he said simply. He was silent for just a second before he turned to me. So let me make sure I have this straight. You shifted, discovered the kitsune, that you are one and all that entails, learned to control your talents, and shifted a non-shifter for the first time in what, 6 weeks' time? About that, yes. I said, but when you say it like that, it sounds more impressive than it really was. It's not impressive? I shook my head. Not to me. It's just life. I was out on a hike with my best friend and was bitten by a rattlesnake. I panicked and shifted. In front of someone? He sounded alarmed. I nodded and continued. What I didn't know was that my best friend was kitsune. He'd been my best friend since kindergarten. When he first shifted, he scented the kitsune in my blood and went to our anakitos, who had him keep an eye on me for signs of shifting. I told the entire story, how he'd kept me calm and talked me through shifting again before taking me to our anakitos. It wasn't until we pulled into the yard that I realized he was taking me to Bill. So you knew Bill too? All my life. He's my dad's best friend. He's been a second father to me all my life. So he helped you to adjust? I nodded. He worked with me to help me learn to control my telepathy, and Karen taught me to shield. When we learned by accident that I could restrict animal forms, he set it up so I could train with Alexis. I nodded to where she was sitting. He's done everything he could to help me. What made you think you could shift a non-shifter? I was learning to call animal forms, working with Alexis in our clinic on my days off. Then I ran into Devon. I hadn't seen him in years. You knew him? I've known Devon since I was a kid. He was in my older sister's class. He scowled and narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Somehow, you seem to know everyone. We live in a small community. If you don't know everyone, you know someone they know. It's nothing remarkable where we're from. Ridges nodded, seeming to accept the explanation. I continued. Obviously, I couldn't have known when we were kids that he was kitsune, but when I ran into him again, I scented it. I asked him about it. He explained that he was a non-shifter, and life went on. As I had more lessons with Alexis, I realized that I could sense Devon's wolf. How? Ridges asked. We have few people who call animal forms. They tell us they can't call the animal form the first time because they can't sense it until after someone's shifted. Well, that's a little more complicated. I hedged. After a little bit, I realized that I have another talent. I can sense power. Sense power? I'm still having a hard time with that one. He seemed baffled. From what I know, it's an unknown talent. But basically, I can sense how strong someone is, and I can sense other powers in non-kitsune. His eyebrows lifted nearly to his hairline. You can sense powers in humans? I nodded. I know a guy who's a seer. He has visions about people or things he comes in contact with. The first time I saw him after I shifted, he felt different. I sensed something in him I hadn't felt before. It took me a while in talking with Alexis's mate, Hank, to figure out what it was. Ridges nodded. Sensing powers is how I was able to feel Devon's wolf before he'd shifted. It felt the same to me as anyone else's animal form. So you just shifted him? Ridges asked. I shook my head. It wasn't that easy. I asked Bill about it, and he did some research. He couldn't find where it had ever been done, but he was willing to let me try if Devon agreed. He let me make the offer to Devon, and we didn't tell anyone until after he'd made his decision. There were very few present in case it didn't work, but Alexis was one who was there. And you just shifted him? That easily? No, it wasn't that easy. There was a complication, I said, and Alexis took over. I watched his system as she tried to shift him, and I saw something prevent him from shifting. It was a flaw in his system that kept him from shifting. I tweaked it and had her try again. On the second try, he shifted like he had been shifting all along. Ridges turned to Devon. And how have you adjusted? Well, sir, Devon said. I had a few bumps along the way, but things have gone pretty well. I knew what to expect, and I had more control over my body and emotions than the average newbie, and I think that helped. How is it that you managed to qualify as an enforcer within a couple of months of your first shift? I had a lot of training during 10 years with the Army, both in hand-to-hand combat and tactics. Much of that translated well into the fight it took to qualify. Devon glanced at me. Plus, I had one hell of an incentive. Ridges chuckled. I bet you did. So what exactly do you want from me? Permission to offer the non-shifter in your territory the opportunity to shift. Alexis took the lead again. And if he chooses to try, we're going to need a place to do it. Ridges nodded slowly. I can agree to that, with the stipulation that I be present for the event. I'd also like for one of my healers to be present as well. Alexis looked at me for my opinion. I nodded, agreeing. Not a problem, she said. Then go ahead and make the offer. See what he says before we make any further plans. Thank you, sir, I said. We spent a few minutes saying our goodbyes, and Alexis, Devon, and I left, meeting up with Caden in the waiting area before heading out to the car. In the car, after leaving the Aniquito's office, I dialed Reese Donovan's number and left a message asking him to call me, and that I'd like to set up an appointment to meet with him. Alexis, Devon, Caden, and I found a restaurant on the edge of the water and ate lunch, and then we took a walk along Alaskan Way, enjoying the nice day and the breeze off the water. We walked up the Pike Place Hill Climb Walk to the Pike Place Market and had a good time taking in the sights at the historic Pike Place Market. We just arrived back at the hotel when my PCD rang. It was Reese Donovan calling me back. Hello, I answered. Miss Daniels? He said. This is Reese Donovan, returning your call? Yes, Mr. Donovan, I used a polite but businesslike tone. I have some things I'd like to discuss with you, if we could schedule a time to get together? He seemed surprised. I have something I'd like to propose to you, but we need to do it face to face. I tried to calm any apprehensions he might have. Do you want to meet somewhere? We could have dinner? He asked. Actually, it's something that needs to be done a little more privately than a restaurant, I said. You can come to our hotel room, or we can get together on your boat. It's up to you. I guess I could come by your hotel tonight, he said hesitantly. That would be great. I kept my tone bright and cheerful as I gave him the address and our room number. We set a time, one well after mealtime, before ringing off. I let the others know about the meeting, and we ordered to have dinner delivered from a nearby restaurant. While we waited for our food to arrive, we discussed how to bring the issue up to Mr. Donovan, and how to let him know his options without influencing his decision. Later, after we'd eaten and cleaned up, a knock sounded on the door. Knowing it was probably Mr. Donovan, I waited in the common area, while Devon answered the door. He invited Mr. Donovan in and ushered him to the seating area. I stood and greeted him, shaking his hand and introducing him to Alexis and Caden, who had remained seated so as not to intimidate our visitor with his size. Can I get you something to drink? I asked. No, I'm good, he said. Why don't you have a seat? I offered, aware that what we were going to offer him would be a bit of a shock. Reese took a seat in one of the chairs arranged into a conversation area, his confusion growing. I sat on the edge of the sofa near him. This is going to be a little shocking, Reese, but we have a proposition for you. An offer. You have an offer for me? He repeated. I nodded. I realize you probably aren't aware, but we're all kitsune. We know you are too, and that you don't shift. I caught an unfamiliar scent in the air. You're scaring him, Caden said from his seat. We're not here to hurt you or to harass you. We had plenty of time to do that while alone on the boat with you. I reasoned. Why would I invite more witnesses and invite you to my room for that? I tried to calm him. The scent of fear faded some, and a look of confusion crossed his face. If you know I don't shift, what do you want with me? I want to give you the opportunity to shift, I said. That's not possible. He shook his head. Actually, it is. Devon spoke for the first time since greeting Reese. 3 months ago, I was just like you. A non-shifter with no hope of ever shifting, knowing it just wasn't possible. Now, because of Nickie and Alexis, I shift as though I've been doing it all along. You're teasing me, tormenting me. Reese seemed sure. Actually, no, we're not. I assured him. I can't guarantee that it will work, but I'm offering you another opportunity to try. But how? It seems that I have a rare combination of talents that allows me to sense an animal form inside someone who's never shifted. Not being able to sense that animal form is what keeps most who can call animal forms from being able to shift you. Reese nodded. What I was saying apparently matched with what he'd been told. It's as simple as you can sense the wolf when no one else could. He sounded almost lost. I shook my head. I wouldn't say that, but it's a major factor. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, giving myself a few seconds to think. You need to understand, we've only tried this once. Reese turned to Devon. On you? Devon nodded. On me. But it worked? It did, but the process took both of them. Devon motioned to Alexis and me. Alexis is our pack healer. She watched what was going on inside me as Nickie tried to call my wolf and she found something wrong. She fixed it and had Nickie try again. That time it worked. I shifted. Reese turned back to me. And you think it will work with me? I think it could. I can't make promises, but I can tell you I can sense your wolf. I can feel him and I should be able to call him. Assuming the same thing that kept Dev from shifting is what's keeping you from shifting, we should be able to shift you. Wow, Reese looked at his hands where they hung between his knees. I realize it's a lot to take in. We're not asking for an instant decision. Reese looked up at me. It's a big decision. He agreed. I nodded. I know, and we're not going to pressure you either way. You need to know that if you choose to try to shift and it works, you'll be expected to join the local pack. Alexis put in. We've already spoken with the local Anikitos. He's aware of what we're offering you, and he said he'll accept you as part of the pack. I said. Who all knows about this? He sounded nervous. Just a few. We don't want you pressured into a decision that you'll regret. My Anikitos found you. We've spoken with the local Anikitos to get his permission, and his enforcer knows, of course. I'm sure you know that unless you're a close personal friend, the Anikitos always has an enforcer close at hand. I said. Reese nodded, then shook his head. No one's talked to my family? I shook my head. No, and we won't. We'll leave telling them up to you if you choose to shift, assuming it works. He nodded again. All right. He took a deep breath and let it out in a rush. It's something I'd given up hope on, and it's a big decision. Can I have a few days to think about it? Of course. I smiled. Take as long as you need. I handed him a small card with my number. You can contact me here. I said. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have, and if I don't have the answer, I'll tell you that honestly, and then I'll do what I can to find the answer for you. He took the card and nodded. That's good to know. Thank you. We'll be in town for a few days, giving you time to make up your mind, but if it takes more than 3 or 4 days, we'll likely go home until you decide. He nodded again, absently. He seemed almost in shock. Reese? I asked, are you okay? Are you sure you don't want a drink? He looked up and gave me a lopsided grin. You know, a drink probably isn't a bad idea. What do you want? Whatever you have, something strong. I've got a bottle of tequila. Caden offered. Reese nodded. That'll do. Caden stood to get the drink, and Reese's eyes widened when he got a look at how large Caden was, but he didn't say a word. Caden retrieved the alcohol from the bedroom, poured a couple of ounces into a glass from the kitchenette, and handed it to Reese. Reese tipped his head back and downed the whole thing, like someone used to doing shots. He set the glass on the coffee table in front of him. If that was tequila, you paid a pretty penny for it. It was too smooth otherwise. Caden laughed. Had your share of tequila, have you? I grew up in Texas, what do you think? We all laughed and Reese seemed better, less in shock from the news. Thank you for calling, and I'll consider your offer. I'll try to get back to you in a couple of days. Reese stood up. Are you okay to drive after that? Alexis asked. I'm not driving, he said. I didn't know what was going on, and unless you're staying in the hotel, parking's hard to come by, so I took a cab. All right then, she said. I won't stop you from leaving, I just wanted to make sure you're safe. I understand. He smiled at her. That's one of the dangers of being a healer. Alexis laughed. Very true. He turned to leave, Devon walking him to the door. Before leaving, Reese turned back toward the room. Thanks again. I'll be in touch. I smiled and nodded and heard the deep rumble of Devon's voice as he said something to Reese, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. Devon closed the door behind Reese, flipping the deadbolt before he came back to sit beside me. That's done. His voice revealed how relieved he was that it had gone well. Yep, now we wait. We turned on the screen and found a film to watch as we relaxed for the evening.